a lot of Lyft spokespeople might be out there saying, we want to partner with the public sector, we want to achieve these public policy goals, and they actually mean it, they care about it, but when they get down to their lawyers, are the lawyers going to let them do it? That's a different question. The lawyers are there to protect the company and to make sure that they protect their shareholders. They're not interested in public policy benefits. That's not what they're paid to do. So all these things led to us dumping Lyft. And we said, it's not you, it's me. Time to move on. Thanks to Brian and others who helped us come to that decision, which was a difficult decision because we've been working with them and trying to make this happen, and we applied for the grant with them, and it was not easy. But it was well worth doing, and I'll talk more about where we are with it. So let's see if we can figure this one out. This quotation. You see some flaws in the data that lead me to question your conclusions. Sounds pretty reasonable. You are a creative genius. We are blessed to have you, and will build statues in your honor. No? This is a waste of time and money. That's what Bob told me. I think you probably all know the answer is this one. Yes, it is C. That is often how decisions get made, unfortunately. I literally had this conversation with someone at Metro where I said, here's a new idea. The data shows that it's a great idea. I really think we should look at it. And he said, this is a waste of time and money. That's what Bob told me. To which I said, as Bob looked at the data, he ignored that. So part of how you overcome that internal bias, where people just make decisions based on hunches, based on their experience, not necessarily based on looking at the problem and trying to figure out how to solve it. Let's see if we can at least agree on what the goals are for what we're trying to achieve. That's a big part of how you bring people together to solve the problem. And that's part of how we were able to solve this problem for Mobility on Demand. Mobility on Demand is now a new partner called VIA. If you're familiar with them, they are a transportation network company, but they only do shared rides. So there's no personal ride. They operate only in 3 cities, DC, New York, and Chicago, and their mission and their goals are about partnering with transit agents. Uber was as a black car service for rich people. They were not started as Lyft was, as a service where people can drive their own cars and make money and bring people and drive other people around. They were started as a transportation solution where they intended to partner with transit agencies to license their software and algorithms for pooling people in rides in order to make the world a better place. Now, that doesn't mean they're not profit seeking. That doesn't mean their goal isn't to please their investors. Of course it is. But there was much greater alignment with them about what the goals are. And so we're now services provided will ride average person in LA County. You can use Uber and Lyft to access any of our stations, but certainly the 3 on this list. But there are some groups that can't use TNCs to access those stations. That's what this is targeted for. Those groups include people who cannot afford to use TNCs, why we're subsidizing the rides. Those groups include people who are disabled, that's why we're requiring wheelchair accessible vehicles. And those groups include people who are not in possession of a smartphone or a data plan to go with that smartphone. Now, when we were trying to do this, what our thought was on the goals, so it's just in an area where a lot of people who could afford to use TNCs, that wouldn't make sense. We wanted to have it where people were less likely to be able to afford them.
So I have a question just to clarify.
Yeah, I mean, so yes and no. Part of this, the idea, yeah.
So one question about the concern of the operations people. This is a pilot program, and if they were going to provide shared ride service to the station in places where there's high levels of bus service, if customers chose to go to the effort to do that, wouldn't that signal something? Wouldn't it provide you with information about your bus service and what you might need to do to improve it? Yeah. It seems if it's a pilot, you could learn a lot from customers' response to those choices.
Yeah, that was the argument we made. I mean, so yeah, the argument that we made was this pilot program, and if people are using this instead of our buses, doesn't that indicate that they're getting a better service? They didn't like that argument very much. And in fact, I think once NextGen is completed, NextGen is the rethinking and redesign of our entire bus network that's there'll be more opportunities to have those kind of conversations and say, well, maybe bus service isn't the best way to serve these folks based on. So in addition to agreeing on the goals for specifics, Phil, when he created our office, also gave us the role of creating a strategic plan for Metro. People often get confused about that. Why innovation office in charge of strategic planning? Well, for exactly the reasons I was just described. In order to have innovation in a public agency, you have to agree on what you're trying to accomplish, and that's what a strategic plan does. We were charged with creating the strategic plan for the entire organization. It passed in June 2018. It's called Vision 2028. I recommend you take a look at it. That document is intended to guide what we do over the next 10 years. And we created it using a bottoms-up process. We did a lot of surveys, we did a lot of outreach. We talked to everybody outside of Metro, talked to everybody within Metro to create this foundational vision. These are the 5 goals in the strategic plan that we boiled, when you boil it down to what we're trying to do. Provide high-quality mobility options. So that means things like Measure M and all the $120 billion worth of infrastructure investment we're going to be making over the next 40 years to build rail, BRT, and highway throughout the county. Create outstanding trip experiences for all, so making customer experience and a focus on how well we serve our customers. We are the largest agency, and while we control a lot of the purse strings, we cannot do this without our partners. We cannot do this without the addition of 88 cities in LA County. We can't promote trustworthy governance. We have to build our board. And our board, remember, is composed almost entirely of elected officials. We got the mayor, we got the 5 county supervisors, the mayor of Los Angeles, I should say. I'm not allowed to say that he's the mayor because there are several mayors on the board who are equally mayoral. Long Beach and Inglewood are also there. And then we've got folks representing various parts of LA County who are all elected officials except one. Electeds are, and that's often a strategy that we use, because if I know that what I'm trying to do with customers need as a whole, they might be responding to the customer that's in front of them at that moment. They might be responding to the customers who are yelling the loudest in their service area. I don't know if you've been following what's going on with the Crenshaw line operational plan, but that's something that's a great example of it, right? Where we are opening a new Crenshaw line in 2020. That line is going to connect from the Green Line to the Expo line, essentially, right? And when we do that, we're going to change the operations of the Green Line, because most of the people who are getting on the Green Line are getting on the Green Line east of the Crenshaw line, east of Crenshaw Boulevard. They're taking buses to and from that line and getting on the Green Line, which those north-south buses, which tells us that they're trying to go north and south. So we want to run the Green Line directly into the Crenshaw line road. And then that leaves the other portion of the Green Line that goes to the South Bay cities, down to Beach, those areas, as being just a stub that goes up to what will be the future area and back. So, right, we've been losing customers for a while now. I don't know if you've been following it, but our ridership has been dropping as it has been nationally. And we don't then say, well, we lost these customers, so let's change our service. Now, we are doing that with our next gen bus study, but we're also adding tremendous amounts of public transit service over the next 40 years because voters approved Measure M. So it's not as simple as that we lose customers, we go out of business. There are a lot of other political forces at play. More products, more market share. In our case, more products, more complicated, more expensive. That's the regular standard bus or the articulated bus, because if you have lots of different vehicles, you got to have all the parts for those types of vehicles. It becomes more and more challenging. So,
talking about customers and Measure M, what are your thoughts on people on like the voting system for transit itself, like something like Measure M, where people vote for it, but you don't necessarily know if they're going to use it. They like the idea of it, but they may not end up using it, versus like pilot programs where it gives you guys the ability and the control to test things out.
Measure M, it's a very large conversation about Measure M, but I'll give you the short version. First of all, sales taxes are not, whereas if you are paying for driving on the roads, then to build more public transit, then that actually could influence your behavior in addition to funding public transit. So that's one thing. Second thing is the way the Measure M was built politically was that every part of the county gets a project, right? That's how you build, that's how you get 71% of the vote. We had to get 2/3 to pass it. So if you're going to give everyone their candy, you're going to spend a lot more to get a lot less by very nature. Because if we really wanted to say where we build the best public transit system, most of it would be within the city of Los Angeles. You're not going to get a countywide vote for that. So we had to spread those projects around, make sure everyone gets one in the time frame that they want. And then finally, tremendous bias in Measure M and in general by electeds for rail service. Rail is considered what they want. They want projects. They are not in the fact that they're not going to point back and say, oh, look, we improved mobility. They don't say that. They want to say, look at this thing that I built. And instead of spending additional money on in the San Fernando Valley to bring people north and south, which is where we are lacking good transit options, we're going to invest and make this thing and improve the capacity of that line in many, many ways without. But that's because San Fernando Valley said, everyone else gets rail, we need to have rail. That's how these things go. All right, let me see if I can finish up. Choose the salesperson quotation. So not Metro, this is somebody selling me something. This new autonomous vehicle technology will be the future of transportation. People often think that transportation can be solved with technology, when transportation is a policy problem. It is not a technology problem. We could solve the transportation problem in LA County today if we better allocated street space, charge people roads, put a lot of buses on those roads. We would have the solution tomorrow. You don't need new technology to do that. But technology sells, and elected officials like the idea of saying, well, this technology will fix it, rather than arguing with people about putting in a bus lane for the next 10 years will fix it. Because it's a lot easier to talk about new technology. And as a result, a lot of innovation offices get bogged down with demonstrating new technology, trying to do things that show that they're innovative. One example is the microtransit graveyard. You may be aware that there have been a number of microtransit experiments in this country where public transit agencies have attempted to operate a smaller on-demand type of service and see if that will attract more customers. They have all failed, that are hanging on by a thread. The reason that they have failed, in large part, and you can read a paper that we wrote on this that Eno published, if you want to learn more about it, the reason that they failed is that they were rushing to demonstrate the technology. They were rushing to get out there and say, let's get this service on the street. Let's put it where we think that it might work, and not really putting thought into what they were actually doing. And that's why these pilots, one in Santa Clara Valley, one in Kansas City, and this was an unsolicited proposal that we received. We've taken this idea and said, rather than just throw it out there, we're going to do an entirely new type of procurement strategy to get this done so that we have a better chance of success. I'll explain what that is in a minute. So which of these is Metro quotation? We need to promote innovation, take risks, and break through walls to achieve success. If we stay out of jail, that's a win. I did allude to that earlier. We have never had delays or gone over budget. Yes, that is the correct one. That is what was told to me. And that was told to me because from the procurement officer's standpoint, he did everything he could do to make sure that we didn't have delays or go over budget on the project. And from his standpoint, he achieved success. But we know that in reality, that is not true. And in reality, the only way that I get things done, the only way that our office succeeds is having procurement on our side. They have come a long way since that man said that to me 3 years ago. They have a new person running the office. She came from SoCal Edison. She has a very different perspective on things. She is fantastic. And she has understood that innovation and procurement is the key to success of innovation throughout the agency. And that's why when we undertook our microtransit pilot procurement, it became an unstoppable procurement. Because when we first started doing this, before procurement got involved, there was a lot of, well, I don't know, and how we do it, and. But once we designed a new structure with procurement that was actually going to work, and they started driving the process, it was unstoppable. And this thing is getting close to launching. What we did is we said, instead of putting this out there and putting out an RFP and saying, we're going to do microtransit, and we want to do it here, and give us your best bid on the project, which is traditionally how a transit agency would do things. Instead, we put out an RFP that said, we don't know where this should go. We don't know what it should look like. We just know we want to offer some kind of on-demand service. We gave very limited parameters. Some kind of on-demand service, vehicles smaller than a bus, bigger than a car, some kind of fares that are reasonable, some kind of disabled access. There are a lot of things we had to have, but we made it very open-ended. And then 3 different firms were contracted to design this service and where it should go. And those 3 firms are still competing with each other, working on this project, saying, here's where it should go. And here's where we're going to operate it. They're going to not only design the service, but they're going to provide the software for the service. We're going to actually use our operators to operate the service, which makes it much smoother from a union perspective. But they are going to be designing the service, and they're going to tell us where it will work, and they're going to take some of the risk on this project because they're putting a lot of sweat equity in. They're invested in making sure that this project works. We brought in subject matter experts to evaluate the proposals. That had never been done before. Procurement agreed to that. This is the project development agreement concept that I just talked about, where they're helping us formulate the project before we contract with them for the project. That's never been done before. We tested the service before selecting the vendor. I mean, that you would think you would do that, right? But we don't do that because that could be an unfair advantage. We had to design tests that were exactly identical for each vendor to make sure that they were fair. But we did test all the service before we selected the 3 that we went with. We tested all of them. And they didn't know, by the way, that we were going to select more than one. We could have selected just one, and I think they were assuming we were going to select just one to design the service. But by selecting 3, they're still competing now. When we first talked about this concept, our folks in legal almost lost their minds. But they talked to procurement worked it out, they were on board, and we made it happen. And this project is going to launch next year. So, to sum up, yeah, I think you probably know at this point. Could have thought of it on our own. We improve services, more people use them, can't afford that. These are things that all three can say. And these are the kinds of things that we're dealing with on a regular basis. People say, when we bring them a new idea, they do say things like, why are we giving our customers more options? People don't often think at a transit agency about their customers being customers. They think of them as being people who have no other choice, and therefore they're using our services. So we should give them the basic service that meets their needs for the lowest cost of taxpayer dollars. That's not our perspective, and that's not the perspective of this agency going forward. We need to give our customers options because they have other options, and we have to be competitive with those options. We could have thought of that on our own. Often a reaction I get when an unsolicited proposal comes in, my reaction to that is, you could have thought of it on your own. Yes, but you didn't. That would be the key. It's like you know, anyone could have painted a Jackson Pollock, but you did. If we improve our services, more people will use them and can afford that. I already talked about that as being an issue. It is especially an issue with the services that are for the most vulnerable members of society and are the poorest delivered, which are the services that are provided by Access Services, which is another agency that provides disabled services for disabled people who can't use Metro, where you have to call 48 hours in advance. They give you a 2-hour window in which they might show up, and they rarely show up on time. So we provide the worst possible service to the people who need it most, because they have said this to me, well, if we make it better, then we won't be able to provide the service. So how do you change those things? How do you get past that within an organization like LA Metro? It's not easy, but if you follow the lessons learned, I think there is some evidence that this can succeed. I think we've had a lot of success so far. You have to establish credibility. You have to learn to distinguish between PR and reality, so you're not chasing squirrels. You have to understand that everyone has to agree on what you're trying to accomplish, or else there's no way you can accomplish. You have to agree that more customers are good. That would be a first step. Resist the urge to demonstrate technology. Don't just follow that, because electeds will be distracted by that, and they'll guide you towards musk tunnels, and they'll guide you towards autonomous vehicles, and they'll guide you towards all kinds of things that don't actually solve the mobility problem. You can't do that. And finally, procurement's your best friend. That is how things get done. I didn't know that when I took this job, that my job would be procurement. I didn't realize that. But that's really what a lot of what my job is. My job is getting new stuff. And getting new stuff requires a department, procurement agency, within your agency that is focused on trying to do new things. I've talked to a lot of government agencies that are trying to do innovation, and the first thing I always ask them is, how's your procurement? And if they tell me procurement is a mess, which is usually what they tell me, I say you're going to have a lot of challenges making change, because that's critical to success. So that's what I've got. I'm happy to take more questions. I think we have some time. So thank you. Yeah.
Do you work with similar agencies in other cities that are trying to look into innovative transportation or new forms of connectivity, like maybe in the Bay Area or on the East Coast or in the Midwest?
Yes, all the time. We were one of the first innovation offices, and so people often call us and want to know what we're doing, how we set ourselves up, what we've accomplished. Several agencies have actually copied our unsolicited proposal policy and just put it on their own website, which is great. We are trying, as part of this achievement, to be a center of excellence where people from around the country and around the world look to us as a place that is doing the most innovative stuff and that is transforming the region. So we're excited, whenever someone calls us for that kind of thing. Yes.
How involved are you with the next gen bus, the changing of the routes, and what kind of the key goals of that you see being most initiative?
Yeah, not as involved as I'd like to be, which is often the answer for everything that's going on in Metro. One of the biggest struggles is, as you can probably tell, I love this stuff, right? I've studied my whole life, I'm passionate about it, I care about it deeply, and I want to be involved in everything. But I'm only one person, and my department is only 12 people, so we can't do much beyond what's in our wheelhouse. But we have been slightly involved in Next Gen. The reason we were involved in Next Gen is, first of all, we wanted to be involved in selecting a consultant, and we were. But also because microtransit and on-demand technology is going to be a part of Next Gen, we have to be involved from that standpoint in saying, like, here's these experiments we're conducting. Let's see what this tells us about where this fits into the redesign of the bus network. Maybe there are parts of our bus network we should eliminate service and replace it with microtransit or with an on-demand service for another time. And then third, the data that we're getting from NextGen is fantastic. They've got better data than we've ever seen, cell phone data from people, telling us where people are going to and from, that is really helping us figure out how to provide better service. The number one takeaway from that, just to kind of sum it up, is that there is a huge market for short trips that we are not serving. There is a lot of demand for short trips where people are currently driving, where we have capacity we can use, where if we put a little more frequent, better service in certain areas, we get a lot more. Yeah.
So what do you think about the recent movement of Uber and Lyft? They're building their mobility as a service platform and building ecosystem, which is covering from the short trip to longer trip, and they are also integrating public transport. So do you think it's like the public transportation agencies have to leverage these kind of platforms owned by the private sector, or the public sector has to build their own platform based on the public transit services?
Yeah, in general, I lean against us building anything with respect to technology, because we're never going to do as good a job as the private sector. We're never going to be able to adjust quickly enough. There's always going to be a politicization of some component of it. So I'd rather they do. Now, that said, what Uber and Lyft are trying to do is what Amazon has already done, take over the world. That's their goal. And so from a public policy standpoint, that terrifies me that the private sector could potentially monopolize transportation options within a metropolitan area. And I think that what history bears out, the thing we have going for us, is that until you get to the monopoly standpoint, it is highly unprofitable to run transportation services. And I think Uber and Lyft are experiencing that right now. And the question is, how long will their investors stand by while they lose more and more money and expand more and more to try to take over things until the point where they can actually make money, which is when they have a monopoly. And how much will cities and agencies like ours resist as they try to become a monopoly and get that power, pricing power, which is the only way that they're going to be successful financially in the long run. So one of the things in our strategic plan is that we made the argument in there that we need to take over regulation of the TNCs. Now, to make that argument all day, whether we can actually achieve it is another story. You may know it's currently the TNCs are regulated by the CPUC, state agency, and they are regulated primarily on the basis of safety, not about mobility or environmental benefits. And there have been a number of studies indicating that perhaps they do contribute substantially to congestion or environmental degradation. They dispute those findings. There's other evidence perhaps that they're not making that much of a difference. It's all sorting itself out. But the key component is that they are definitely having some kind of impact on the mobility system. And it is in part because they are playing on they're on a playing field that is not level. They're using public infrastructure that we are funding to try to generate a profit, or failing to generate a profit, but they're still trying. And therefore, our argument is, well, we should get a cut of that action if they are making money, and that they should be on a level playing field with other mobility services, because they really are mobility service. We are going to be talking to our board about that next week, because in addition to congestion pricing, we priced out the money we could potentially bring in from charging fees on TNCs and other new mobility providers, and it's pretty substantial, and I think the board will be very interested in that. Yeah.
Can you speak a little bit to some of the other projects that your office has worked on that were successful that you didn't mention in the presentation?
Sure, yeah, Brian asked me to focus on new mobility components, but there are a number of other projects that we've got going on. I mean, the two biggest ones are we're pursuing public-private partnerships on 2 rail lines. One is the West Santa Ana branch, which I already mentioned. The other is the Sepulveda Transit Corridor, which is a rail line that'll go roughly parallel to 405 from the Valley of the City. And both those projects are being, as a result of unsolicited proposals, are going to be done as P3s. And we're going to be bringing private sector financing in. The private sector is going to put up the money for the project, they're going to build the project, they're going to then operate and maintain the project for a 30-year term, and we will pay them availability payments, regular payments, once the project opens, to continue to do that. And the reason that that mechanism has a lot of benefit is that it helps us transfer some of the risk for that project to an entity that is better able to manage that risk. Just like we were talking about platforms and developing platforms as being something the public sector is not necessarily good at, there are other things when it comes to building large infrastructure projects that we're not very good at, the private sector is going to be better at doing. Now, they're not going to take the risk on things that are highly political, but they'll take the risk on things they know they can manage and manage better than us. That'll mean that we're more likely to stay on time and on budget, more likely to deliver a feasible project, more likely to deliver a project that focuses on customers. So those are the 2 biggest ones. There have been a number of other small projects that I can mention. One, we're going to be using drones to inspect our tracks. Currently, somebody walks along the tracks to inspect them. It's highly inefficient, and also those people miss things. Drones are much better at that. We're going to be doing that shortly. We've got another project where we are installing a new type of bike lock at stations. So right now, if you bike to a station, you may have noticed you have to rent a locker in advance. It's rather cumbersome. You have to have a key. You have to pay for it. You have to shove your bike in a locker. It's a whole thing. We've got a new technology where you can just roll up with your bike, use your tap card and unlock the lock, put your bike in, tap again, and then walk away. And it's very safe, much more user convenient, customer friendly. Another one I'll mention, this is the last one, there's a lot, so I'll just mention the last one, is mobile tolling. So currently when you pay a toll on our hot lanes, you got to have a transponder in your vehicle in order to pay that toll. That seems like a waste. Everyone's got a smartphone. You can use that to pay your toll. If you don't have a smartphone, you can still use a transponder, but we're moving towards using phones as a much more customer convenient mechanism for paying for tolls, and it potentially will reduce some of our costs as well. Yeah.
When you mentioned public-private partnerships, and I wanted to ask, like, when you like finance something like a rail line through a public-private partnership, do you maintain the same sort of like level of service or expectations that it would be if Metro did it itself? Like, I think I've heard like in Denver, where Phil Washington used to work, like the rail line that was built through a public-private partnership costs more and is often late or broken down, and there's no sort of accountability mechanism because it's run by a corporation, not by the transit agency. And so when I hear that, I sort of like worry that is it going to be some sort of subpar product that ends up being delivered to the public?
Yeah, that's a fair question, and I'm not an expert on Eagle P3. If Phil was here, he could tell you what's going on and what's happened there. But what I can tell you about P3 in general is that you have to specify in the contract the performance outcomes you want in order to hold the private sector accountable for meeting those performance outcomes. If they're not meeting those performance outcomes, you have to sue them. And that's what's going on in Denver right now, is that the private sector is not meeting the performance outcomes they agreed to in the contract, and they are being sued. And now the question is, if we were delivering that through a traditional public sector model, would it be doing better? Possibly, but if we deliver that through a public sector model, that project wouldn't be open yet. So there's that, and it would have cost an extra $300 million. So there's that. So there are trade-offs to these things. Now P3s are often seen in the United States as being some kind of new delivery mechanism that's untried and has all these risks or challenges associated with it. But that is not the case in other countries. In Canada, P3 is just another delivery mechanism for public transit projects. It's used all the time. In the UK, all the time. Australia, all the time. It is a common delivery mechanism with lots of great track records for good operational and maintenance benefits. That doesn't mean that every project is going to be a winner. The question is, can it outperform the traditional delivery method in enough cases to make it worthwhile? I would argue yes. Yeah.
No, I know we wouldn't necessarily classify it as extraordinary innovation in other parts of the world, but what about, you were talking about how Metro always has this money problem. in terms of, better service, more customers, more hassle. What about, does the OEI have any interest, or is there any process right now in looking towards Metro as sort of a landlord and real estate developer and using their properties to generate revenue and then use that revenue to develop rail lines? I mean, that was a huge model in Europe and Japan after World War II. It was tremendously successful. Are we working on anything like that here?
Yeah, so that's definitely an idea that's been talked about a lot. Interesting point on that. So when we designed the unsolicited proposal policy, we were all set to go out with our unsolicited proposal policy that Phil wrote himself. And we modified it, we made changes, we got, and then I got a call from someone in a department in Metro called Joint Development. Joint Development is a department that develops Metro's land around transit stations or elsewhere. And they said, please don't go out with an unsolicited proposal policy that includes joint development. If you do that, you will completely screw up our joint development program. And the reason that that's true is if you've lived in Los Angeles, you know that people in communities do not generally like being told what's going to be put in a new development by the private sector coming in and saying, here's what's going to be here. And a public agency then saying, okay, great. That's just not how things work here. It has to be a bottoms-up process where you work with the community and say, what do you envision for this land? How is it going to work? How do we get affordable housing in here? How do we accomplish all these public policy goals? And by the end of the day, you've lost a lot of that private sector interest. You've lost a lot of that ability to generate a tremendous amount of revenue. But you've accomplished a lot of things that people think are important. One of our goals in the strategic plan is 35% affordable housing in all the developments that we do. Now, by putting that in there, that does diminish our ability to bring in revenue from those projects and pay for public transit. So that's the trade-off that our board has made. The second issue is, there's a lot of talk about, well, can we create TIF districts? Those are the tax increment financing, where you raise revenue based on the increased value of the land after you put in transit, you raise revenue taxes, or EIFDs, enhanced infrastructure financing districts. Yes, you could do that. We don't have the power to do that, because if we go and try to seek the power to do that in the state legislature, all of the cities in LA County and the county itself will fight us. They don't want us to have that power. They want to have that power. They want to do the EIFDs. They want to do the TIFs. So while it is an attractive idea, and while it is something that I was very interested in when I first got to Metro, I kind of at this point decided that the juice isn't worth the squeeze on that particular one. Okay?
Any other comments or questions for Joshua? Okay, let's thank him again. And for those of you in the class, you all saw that a survey went out? Yeah, okay, and you'll be getting something else this Friday or Saturday in terms of what to prepare, okay? All right, thanks a lot.